Hi guys, welcome to Krakow. So today we will be discussing about the approach to philosophical RCs. So first of all, the field of philosophy is quite vast and complex, and from CAT standpoint, historically the philosophical RCs that have come are usually difficult to interpret. So unless you have some sort of exposure to these philosophical ideas, it is difficult to tackle them. If we look at the trend since last few years, we had one philosophical RC on social psychology in 2018. In 2019, however, we didn't have any philosophical RC. Although humanities is sort of connected to philosophy, this is not core philosophy as such. So we do not have any philosophical RC. Then why do we need to prepare for these philosophical RCs? That is because CAT does not have a set pattern. In fact, this year the difficulty of VARC was jacked up. It was a googly. The same can happen next year too. If you look at the pattern before 2017, there were a lot of core philosophical RCs like the ones in Aeon passages. In fact, there was one year where there were two philosophical RCs, one on scientism and one on unconscious mind. So it is better that we know how to approach them. What does philosophy entail? The philosophies are usually in exploratory, contemplative mode. They are questioning existence, they are questioning reality, morals, values in order to guide the human behavior. This aspect of guiding human behavior makes the entire subject very broad based, open based, so more or less anyone can have their own philosophies. This makes the RCs very abstract in nature. So the openness of ideas in philosophy makes them very abstract in nature. Sometimes you might not even agree with what the author is saying, but you'll have to take it as face value. You'll have to keep your bias and prejudice aside. How do we improve our accuracy in philosophical RCs? There is no shortcut to this. We have consistently emphasized that you need to keep reading. Once you are familiarized with more philosophical ideas, especially Aeon passages, they are a beautiful place. They have a lot of good RCs on how humans think, where the human society is headed. If you read them, then it will give you a lot of insights. It will give you insights into the jargons of philosophy such as epistemology, metaphysics, etc. So, Aeon passages are a good place to start in order to improve your contemplation, your understanding of these philosophies. The other good source is reading books, of course. You have many good books like Good and Evil by Friedrich Nietzsche, or if you look at Indian philosophers, there are a lot of New Age philosophers like Vivekananda or Aurobindo. Any of these books, if you pick up, you'll get a lot of insights into this field. From CAT perspective, these RCs are usually centered around a few select philosophers, the Greek philosophers of Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, or the Chinese philosopher Confucius, Karl Marx. Knowing these people, knowing their philosophies will definitely help your understanding. Your reading speed will be much higher when you are trying to solve it. And one key strategy in VARC is knowing when to drop a particular set. Many students have a habit of going through all the five sets, which is not at all advisable. In fact, this year, some of the faculty themselves felt like pulling their hair off. The difficulty was such. So, if you are familiar with some of the jargons and you know these concepts, then you will soon be able to pick up whether this is solvable by you or how difficult it is. So, Aeon passages or reading books are a good source to improve your skills. However, many students who do not have the habit of reading or you do not want to go through the hassle of finding these passages, so we have created a daily target where every day we upload one test on RC test. Usually it is classified on different genres, philosophical RCs, scientific RCs. You can take them, improve your skills every day. We have the mock tests and we have daily articles where every day our faculty posts one very insightful article. It is sometimes philosophical, sometimes based on economics or based on the current affairs. The intention is that you use daily tests every day, you use these daily article, you read the daily articles in order to consistently improve every day. Your comprehending speed or your reading speed, they are going up every day consistently. That is the motive. So today we look at two philosophical RCs showing you firsthand how we approach them and how we interpret them. The secret to crack CAT is taking a lot of mocks. We at Krakow give all the previous year's CAT, XAT and IFT papers in the actual exam format. Also, if you just Google Krakow free CAT mock, you can find 3 free CAT mocks in the latest exam pattern. You can take them and get detailed analysis. Today we are having a look at a philosophical passage. This dialogue begins abruptly with a question of Meno, who asks whether virtue can be taught. Socrates replies that he does not as yet know what virtue is and has never met anyone who did. Then he cannot have met Gorgias when he was at Athens. Yes, Socrates had met him, but he has a bad memory and has forgotten what Gorgias said. Will Meno tell him his own notion, which is probably not very different from that of Gorgias? So initially, what dialogue they are saying? Dialogue is basically from a Greek point of view. It is a book, you can say, a written transcript, a long written transcript on a particular subject. So this book, they are saying, it starts abruptly where Meno is questioning Socrates. Both of these are philosophers. So Meno is asking Socrates, do you know what virtue is, or whether virtue can be taught? For that, Socrates replies that he doesn't know what virtue is and has never known who knows what virtue is. Immediately, Meno replies that then he cannot have met Gorgias when he was at Athens. So perhaps you can infer from this that Gorgias is someone who can define virtue. Since Socrates can't define it, he is saying that he might not have met Gorgias. But if you observe carefully, the next sentences, yes, Socrates had met him, but he has a bad memory and has forgotten what Gorgias said. This is this is an assertive statement. This is said like a truth. This is being said by the author, not by Meno. Until here, Meno says that then he cannot have met Gorgias, but the author says that in fact indeed he had met, but he has forgotten, perhaps he has a bad memory. Then Meno, then he will question whether Meno will tell his own version of what virtue is, or whether virtue can be taught, which is not very different from that of Gorgias. And here this is what Meno goes on to say. Oh yes, nothing easier. There is the virtue of a man, of a woman, of an old man, of a child. There is a virtue of every age and state of life, all of which may be easily described. So this is the definition of virtue that Meno gives initially. So if you were to summarize the entire paragraph, the main crux of the point will be that initially Meno asks Socrates about virtue. Socrates says that he doesn't know what virtue is and doesn't know anyone who knows about virtue. Even though he had met someone called Gorgias, he has forgotten what Gorgias had told him. And then Meno goes on to describe his own version, which is very similar to that of Gorgias' version. And he says that virtue is different for people with different age, different sex. So an old man has his own virtue, a woman has her own virtue, a man has his own virtue, a child has his own virtue. Virtue is different for different ages. It is also different based on, he says, based on state of life. Let's look at the second paragraph. Socrates reminds Meno that this is only an enumeration of the virtues and not a definition of the notion which is common to them all. Okay, so Socrates refutes this. Socrates says that this is just an enumeration. Enumeration is just recounting step by step. For men it is different, for women it is different. He is saying that it does not address the common notion. It's like it's not a wholesome definition. That's what Socrates is, his contention is. This is an enumeration, but not wholesome definition. This is as per Socrates. And then Meno defines virtue to be the power of command. So he gives a second attempt and now he describes virtue as power of command. But to this again exceptions are taken. For there must be a virtue of those who obey as well as those who command. And the power of command must be justly or unjustly exercised. So he gives a second definition as virtue is power of command, or virtue is authority, one's authority. In simpler terms, you can say one's authority. But again, there is one more drawback to this. Virtue is different for a person who is obeying the commands, and virtue is different for a person who is commanding, who is in a commanding position. If you take for example a king has his own set of virtues, or a soldier has his own set of virtues. So you can't give a general notion that the power of command or one's authority will be equivalent to virtue. Both of them are not equivalent. So they are giving this example that commanding and obeying both have their own virtues, and we can't say that virtue is nothing but one's authority or how much you command. So even his second definition is flawed. Then Meno is very ready to admit that justice is virtue. So in his third definition he says that virtue is justice. Would you say virtue or a virtue? For there are other virtues like such as courage, temperance and the like. Just as round is a figure and black and white are colors, and yet there are other figures and other colors. So here he is giving the example that figure, there can be round is one type of figure, hexagon is one type of figure, square is one type of figure. Similarly, white and black are one type of figures, colors, but there are many such colors too. He is saying that similarly, justice is one type of such virtue. Justice is one of the virtue. There are similarly many other virtues such as you have temperance, for example, you have courage. So he is giving the example of say figure. He quotes the example of figure and says round is a form of figure, but there are many different types of figures. Color, popular colors you have white and black, but there are also many other colors. Similarly, even in case of virtue, justice is one kind of virtue. You have many other virtues like courage and temperance. We say virtues bar a virtue. Okay, so he says virtue, we cannot define virtue as justice too. Let Meno take the examples of figure and color and try to define them. Meno confesses his inability, and after a process of interrogation in which Socrates explains to him the nature of a simile in multis. So Socrates asks Meno to you only define what a figure is, what a color is, and then you can go on to define what a virtue is. When Meno is unable to do it, Socrates himself goes on to define. Now we look at some of Socrates' definition. So Socrates is saying that in which Socrates explains to him the nature of a simile in multis. So similarity in many. What is he looking for? Similarity in many. Socrates himself defines figure as the accompaniment of color. So Socrates is saying that a figure is similar to color. Figure is nothing but shape. Shape of an object is similar to color. How can we understand this? Let's look at the further statement. But someone may object that he does not know the meaning of the word color, and if he is a candid friend and not a mere disputant, Socrates is willing to furnish him with a simpler and more philosophical definition into which no disputed word is allowed to intrude. Figure is the limit of form. So in the first part he is saying that he is equating color with figure, he is saying these two are similar, and then the author goes on to say that it seems counterintuitive. Color is the superficial, what is visible to us, while figure is the shape. How can we find similarities in these two? Then he says that at the philosophical core of it, if someone does not dispute what he is saying, then to a candid friend he is going to explain how he implies this. He says that figure is the limit of form. That is, if you take figure for example, there are various possibilities, various types of figures, but if you constrain it to one specific form, then you get say square or a rectangle or a triangle, something like that. So he is defining this as figure is a limit of form, and he is drawing similarities with color too. You can say color is also a limit of form. There are various possible colors, but you are limiting it to one. So at the core philosophically he is saying that figure is the limit of form. Okay, figure is the limit of form. Remember these two sentences. He is saying that this he is likely to say to a friend, and if he is a candid friend and not a mere disputant who is not going to dispute what he is going to say, then he will go into a simpler and more philosophical definition and explain that when he draws similarity, he generally means that figure is the limit of form or color is the limit of form. Meno imperiously insists that he must still have a definition of color. Some raillery follows, and at length Socrates is induced to reply that color is the effluence of form sensible and in due proportion to the sight. So imperiously means in an arrogant way. With lack of understanding, you go on saying something in an arrogant way. So author says that in an arrogant way, Meno is trying to say that there must be something more to this. This is very abstract. This definition of figure is the limit of form, is very abstract. There must be something more to it, and some raillery follows. Raillery is just, you can say, casual teasing. Raillery is casual teasing. Some raillery follows, and at length Socrates is induced to reply. As a result, Socrates replies at length. He gives a longer definition. He says that color is the effluence of form. Effluence is like oozing out. Oozing out. Effluence is oozing out. Oozing out of form, sensible and in due proportion to the sight. Okay. And then this definition is exactly suited to the taste of Meno, who welcomes the familiar language of the Georges and Empedocials. Socrates is of opinion that the more abstract and dialectical definition of figure is far better. So first he gives an abstract definition of figure, that is figure is the limit of form, and then he gives a longer definition for color, since Meno was not satisfied with this abstract definition. But at last Socrates says that this is the more logical one. The dialectical form is the more logical and more thought-provoking one. So he gives another definition of color too, where the color is oozing out, effluence of form, sensible and in due proportion to the sight, visible to sight. Let's go to the last paragraph. Now that Menu has been made to understand the nature of a general definition, he answers in the spirit of a Greek gentleman and in the words of a poet that virtue is to delight in things honorable and to have the power of getting them. So until here these three are different Menu's definition for virtue, but these three are flawed because they are not suitable wholesome definition. Now based on how Socrates has defined, he has defined color, he has defined figure, based on those definitions now Menu is going to try to define virtue. So they are saying that now that he has understood how a general definition works, now he is going to give definition. First definition he gives is that virtue is to delight in things honorable and to have the power of getting them. That is, you feel happy in honorable things. You do things that are honorable, you feel happy, and the power of getting them, that is how often you can do it. That is virtue. He is defining this as virtue. This is Menu's definition again. So he is defining it as feeling happy in honorable things, feeling happy or feeling delighted in honor, let's say in honor, and power of getting them or power of repeating, and continuously doing it and repeating. This is a nearer approximation than he has yet made to a complete definition, and regarded as a piece of proverbial or popular morality is not far from the truth. So the author is saying that even this is not a complete definition, it's not absolute, this is in fact a nearest approximation. And also he says that if you consider this as a popular morality, then also it is not far from the truth. But the objection is urged that the honorable is the good, and as everyone equally desires the good, the point of the definition is contained in the words the power of getting them. Menu defines virtue as we already saw that it is feeling happy or getting delighted in doing things that are honorable. You do honorable things and do the way you keep on doing it, the power of getting them continuously, that is how you define virtue as. But there is an objection. The objection is that honorable is nothing but something that is good. That is something you continuously want to do, something that is right or something that is good, and all of us seek to be good, all of us desire to be good, or all of us seek good. So the first part of the sentence is somewhat moot. It is like all of us seek good, all of us want to be right. Hence the definition can be further simplified as the power of getting them. Since the first part of the sentence is redundant, we can just define virtue as the power of getting them. But what is them here? Them is the righteous thing or doing the good things, the honorable things. The power of continuously doing the honorable things, that itself is virtue. This can be reduced as the power of doing good. The power of doing good. And they must be got justly or with justice. The definition will then stand thus: virtue is the power of getting good with justice. So until now the justice was defined as it is the ability or the power of getting to do good things. How do you get to do good things? At the heart of virtue what you have is you have righteousness, you have good or right, doing the right thing always. That is nothing but doing things justly. So as soon as you think you say that you are doing things in an honorable way, then it must be just. If you get to do good things, honorable things, it must be just. So you can modify the definition and say that the power of doing good with justice. That is what the author is simplifying the statement here. The power of doing good will become the power of doing good with justice. And lastly, but justice is a part of virtue, and therefore virtue is the getting of good with a part of virtue. The definition repeats the word defined. And then finally the author says that here you are saying you need to be just in order to get to do good things, but justice again falls within the framework of what we call as virtue. Justice is also one of the characteristics of being virtuous. So he will say that virtue is nothing but, if you are trying to define virtue, then you will again, it is like a loop, a circular loop. But justice, then he says that virtue is getting good with a part of virtue. Again, there is a loop involved. That is how they are concluding it. Now let's look at the questions. According to the passage, what is the exact definition of virtue? We just saw this in the last paragraph. I will summarize it for you. So initially Meno goes on to give various definition of virtue, but all these were flawed because they were not wholesome. Then Socrates gives a couple of examples. He defines, say, a figure, he defines color, and then he says this is how you give a generic definition. Based on these examples, Meno gives one more definition of virtue, and he says that virtue is to delight in things honorable and to have the power of getting them. So you feel happy by doing good things, doing honorable things, and the power of getting them is continuously doing it. But the author, he further simplifies it. He says that in things honorable represents something that is good, something that is right, yes, and everyone seeks to be good. So naturally we can reduce it to the second part of the sentence. He says that justice is the power of getting good. Getting them is nothing but getting good. At the heart of virtue, we have righteousness or doing the right thing. So when you say righteousness, immediately you will have justice there. So we can modify the statement. This author will modify the statement in saying justice is the power of getting good with justice. He modifies the statement, and finally, as soon as you say justice is again incorporated in, it is one of the characteristics of virtue itself. So you can say that virtue is the power of doing good with a bit of virtue. So that is a circular thing. Virtue is the power of doing good with virtue. Let's look at the option. Virtue is the process of getting delight from honorable things and having the power of getting them. This is the initial definition, and they say that the author says that this is a nearer approximation and not complete definition. The question is asking what is the exact definition of virtue. Virtue is something that cannot be explained. Okay, we will keep it aside. Virtue is about the power of getting the good out of people. Virtue is about doing good with a bit of virtue or with a bit of justice. That is what finally we saw that. An exact definition of virtue cannot be given without making using virtue itself in the definition. That is what we finally arrive at. Initially, Meno tries to give a definition, but the author says it's a nearer approximation. And then he further simplifies to give a more satisfactory definition, and then it leads to a point where when you are defining virtue, you are using virtue itself again. The option D is the correct option. How many of the following questions is or are not addressed by the passage? What is virtue? We saw it all along. In the first paragraph, he gives 3 different definitions of virtue, and in the last paragraph, he gives one more definition which is further simplified. So we have looked at this. How should man inculcate virtue? I don't think we have seen about, it is talking about what virtue is and analyzing about virtue. It is never about how we should inculcate. That factor has not come up. Is virtue absolute or relative? We have talked about this too. Here we say that Meno defines virtue as the power of command, but the virtue is different for the one who obeys, it is different for the one who commands. So it is relative. And also even in this statement we see that he says that virtue is different for different age and that different state of life. So virtue is relative, it is not absolute, it is not same for everyone, it is different from one person to another. So we can understand this as well. The relationship between virtue and figures or colors, we saw this here. Socrates gives the example of figure. He says that figure is the limit of form, and then he extrapolates it to, you can extrapolate the similar definition to virtue as well, where justice, temperance is one form of virtue. You can extrapolate it and give a wholesome definition to virtue. So we can infer this as well. It is sort of a simile. What are the various characteristics that constitute virtue? So have they given a wholesome characteristics, what and all goes into virtue? In fact, they say that it is very difficult to define virtue, and they give few examples such as we have courage involved, we have temperance involved, we also have justice involved, but nowhere they have given that all this come together to characterize what wholesome is virtue. And also towards the end they struggle to give a very proper definition. We just simplify to arrive at an approximate definition. So again, even this cannot be inferred. So how many of the following is not answered by the passage? Number 2 and number 5 are not answered. So option B is the correct answer. According to the passage, who was Gorgias? Gorgias was the friend of Socrates. See, here in these passages we can infer that Socrates says that only if he was a candid friend he will give this simplified definition, simplified philosophical definition, or else he will not give. So we can imply that Socrates was a friend of Meno. But nowhere in the passage, Gorgias only comes in the first passage. We have not seen that Gorgias was a friend of Socrates, neither did we see that Gorgias was a friend or a teacher of Meno. Gorgias was a revered teacher in Athens. In the passage we only see that Gorgias was in Athens. He says that when Socrates went to Athens, he might not have met him. That is what Meno says. So we can infer that maybe Gorgias is from Athens, but can we infer that he is a revered teacher? I don't think so. So all these 3 are out. Gorgias was a philosopher. See, again, Gorgias was a philosopher is not given, but this is an entirely a philosophical passage, and Gorgias is answering the question of what is virtue, something that is not answered, something even Socrates doesn't know. He says that even he doesn't know anyone who knows the answer for it, and this was answered by Gorgias. And Meno is being inspired by Gorgias' definition, and he is giving his own definition. So you can infer that Gorgias was also a philosopher. You can reasonably infer this. So option D, among all of this, option D is a good option. What is the tone of the passage? Option A says argumentative. Argumentative is a usually neutral tone, but it is opinionated in an objective way. That is, you believe, let's say there are two different opinions for virtue, you believe that only this one is right, but you give objective views, or you give why that is true. Even though they have an opinion, it is a neutral because they give reasons. So argument, it is not argumentative. The author is never leaning to any sort of one definition of virtue. He is illustrating various ones and is analyzing each one of them. So it is certainly a analytical. As soon as you see, you should be taking it, because every definition he is talking about them. He is talking about why it is wrong. He even towards the end, the final definition of Meno, he simplifies it and gives a last form for it. So it is certainly an analytical view. He is not criticizing. He is not having a critical view. Neither is it humorous. So the correct answer is analytical. Let's look at the last question. Which of the following characteristics of Socrates is not illustrated in the passage? Socrates is a forgetful person. In the first paragraph itself, we come across this. The author says that Gorgias, yes, Socrates had met him, but he had a bad memory and has forgotten what Gorgias said. So he has a bad memory and he has forgotten what he has said. So we can reasonably infer that Socrates is a forgetful person. We can infer this. Socrates is repugnatory to his disputants. Repugnatory means repulsive. That too, it is a superlative tone. Extremely repulsive to his disputants. So what does he say here? He says that unless if he is a candid friend and not a mere disputant, Socrates is willing to furnish with him a simpler and more philosophical definition. He says that if he is a candid friend and not a disputant, then he will give a simpler and more philosophical definition. But he never says that what he will do with his disputants. If someone disputes his claim, then how is he going to treat them? How is he going to handle them? That is not given. He is just saying that if he is not a disputant, a candid friend, only then he will give a philosophical definition. So saying that he is repugnatory, that is, he is repulsive to his disputants, which is not mentioned in the paragraph, that is superlative, that is ultimatum, that is wrong. The definitions of Socrates are counterintuitive. We can understand that too here, we can infer that. So when he defines what figure is, he says Socrates himself defines figure as the accompaniment of color. So he is drawing similarity between figure and color, but someone may object that he does not know the meaning of the word color. So it is usually counterintuitive. It might feel like color and figure both are disconnected. Even though there is a deep philosophical meaning, someone apparently, when you look at it superficially, you might feel like he does not understand the meaning of the word color. So this clearly suggests that it is counterintuitive. So we can infer this too. Socrates prefers dialectical definitions. Here at the end we see Socrates is of opinion that the more abstract or dialectical definition of figure is far better. He gives two definitions. One is figure is the limit of form, that is more dialectical abstract definition. When Meno is not satisfied, he gives a more broader definition of color. But he says that he is a fan, or he likes the definition should be to be abstract, which is more thought provoking. So option D can also be inferred. The correct option is answer B. So this is an RC based on politics, history, philosophy. It is certainly a tough read. You might feel like pulling out your hair, but you will get exposed to, say, philosophers, Greek history, the jargons, especially the jargons. The next time you get exposed to jargons of politics like this, you will be more equipped, you will be confident and comfortable solving it, because your comprehension speed would have gone up significantly. So this is a push in direction to getting better at solving political RCs. So we'll go line by line. We'll try to understand, break each one of them and understand them. Okay, let's start. The Politics of Aristotle is the second part of a treatise, of which the Ethics is the first part. It looks back to the ethics, that is, they are saying the politics looks back to the ethics as the ethics looks forward to politics. For Aristotle did not separate, as we are inclined to do, the spheres of statesman and the moralist. Treatise means you can say it's a written work, a very long written work detailing a specific subject, or for ease of context, let's say it's a book, a long book which speaks about a specific subject. And here statesman can refer to a politician who is a reputable politician. Let's say he is a politician. So here they are saying in Aristotle's book, the first part is say ethics, and the second part of the book or the treatise is politics. And the author goes on to say that for Aristotle did not separate, as we are inclined to do, the spheres of statesman and moralist. So he is saying he did not separate ethics and politics. A moralist deals with ethics, while a statesman deals with politics. In Aristotle's written work or his treatise, the first part is ethics. And the second part is politics. And the author goes on to say that for Aristotle did not separate, as we are inclined to do, the spheres of statesman and moralist. So moralist is someone who deals with ethics, while politician deals with politics, of course. So he says that these two are overlapping. That is what we can understand here. Say ethics and politics, as per the treatise of Aristotle, these two are overlapping. In the ethics, he has described the character necessary for the good life, okay, but that life is for him essentially to be lived in society. And when in the last chapters of the ethics, he comes to the practical application of his enquiries that finds expression not in moral exhortations addressed to the individual, but in a description of the legislative opportunities of the statesman. In his work, in his first part of the work, that is ethics, he initially talks about the characters that is necessary in an individual if he wants to live in society. If he wants to live a good life, then what are the characters necessary? Then he goes on to say, towards the end of his ethics, towards the last chapters, he describes the practical applications of his enquiries. So whatever he has written on ethics, how can it be practically applied? He says that finds expression not in moral exhortations. So what is moral exhortation? Moral exhortation is, say, educating an individual in the direction of, say, this is an acceptable moral behavior, this is not an acceptable moral behavior. So he is saying that his enquiries are not for moral exhortation. His enquiries, say, it includes what are the characteristics necessary in an individual to lead a good life. These characteristics he is not saying so that an individual gets better morally. He says it is instead a legislative opportunity for the statesman. It is the legislator's task to frame a society which shall make the good life possible. So that good life comes not by an individual transforming and say this is the characteristic I need to live by. It is by the legislator who will form rules such that the people will start following those norms, those acceptable good norms. So if we try to summarize this, let's say the practical application of the enquiries of Aristotle. First one he says about teaching morality to individuals. First one is teaching morality to individuals. Aristotle says his purpose is not to teach morality to individuals. He instead says that this is a legislative opportunity. How is it legislative opportunity? Legislature will make rules so that people will attain this good life, so that they will follow all these moral principles and attain the good life. Politics for Aristotle is not a struggle between individuals or classes for power, nor a device for getting done such elementary tasks as the maintenance of order and security without too great encroachments on individual liberty. The state is a community of well-being in families and aggregations of families for the sake of a perfect and self-sufficing life. As per Aristotle, politics is not a way to gain power. It is not about always the hunger for power, where all the classes or individuals they are struggling to gain power. He also goes on to say that it is neither about striking a balance between, say, individual privacy or maintaining order and security. He says that politics, as per him, will lead towards a state that is where individual families are happy, the well-being of individual families taken care of, and as a result all those families they come together to make a welfare state, that is the families are self-sufficient, self-reliable. The legislator is a craftsman whose material is society and whose aim is the good life. So he describes this as the good life. The good life is one where all the families are happy, they come together to make a self-sufficient state, and this is done by the legislator. He makes rules such that this good life is attained. So if we try to summarize this, let's say what is Aristotle's ideal state, his idea of ideal state. Aristotle's ideal state. So he says that initially the families are empowered, the well-being of families are taken care of, empowered families, and this will eventually lead to a self-sufficient state. Self-sufficient state. And this good life of each individual is attained by the legislator. He will form rules such that this good life is attained. Let's look at the second paragraph. In an early dialogue of Plato's, the Protagoras, Socrates asks Protagoras why it is not as easy to find teachers of virtue as it is to find teachers of sportsmanship, riding, or any other art. Protagoras' answer is that there are no special teachers of virtue because virtue is taught by the whole community. So, to give you a background, what is a dialogue? Dialogue is basically a script or again a written work. So, one of the written works of Plato is called as the Protagoras. Protagoras is also a philosopher. So, in his work, Socrates is his teacher in fact. Let me say this will be useful to you at some point. Socrates, he existed in say 450 BC. His student was Plato. Plato's student was Aristotle. Aristotle's student was Aristotle trained Alexander the Great. This all of them come in the Greek Empire, the classical era of Greek. Alexander the Great. So he is termed as the founder of Western philosophy. The founder, and these two together are called as the fathers of Western philosophy. Fathers of Western philosophy. So here Plato's master or his teacher was Socrates. Plato has written a book called as the Protagoras. This is also based on another philosopher. So in this book, Socrates asks Protagoras why it is not easy to find teachers of virtue as it is easy to find teachers of other arts. For this, the philosopher replies that there is no special teachers of virtue as the virtue is taught by the whole community. So if we are to summarize this, we can write it as virtue is taught by the whole community. That is the crux. Virtue is taught by the whole community. Plato and Aristotle both accept the view of moral education implied in this answer. In a passage of the Republic 492 BC, Plato repudiates the notion that the sophists have a corrupting moral influence upon young men. The public themselves, he says, are the real sophists and the most complete and thorough educators. No private education can hold out against the irresistible force of public opinion and the ordinary moral standards of society. We have a new term here called as sophists. Sophists are someone who have a rhetorical idea of philosophy, who have a brief idea of philosophy, you can say, and they have their own ideology. To give you an example in today's context, let's say there are many left-wing ideological professors in various universities. If you go to a right-wing institution, there are variety of right-wing ideology. Each of them have their own moral compasses. So you can call all of them a sophist because they have their own ideology, they have defined their own moral compasses. Here they say, here Plato repudiates, or repudiates is nothing but refuse to accept. He refuses to accept the notion that the sophists, every teacher who have their own ideology, they have a corrupting influence upon young man. So Plato is not accepting this. Why he is not accepting? The public themselves, he says, are the real sophists and the most complete and thorough educators. Plato basically says that the corrupted morality is not because of sophists or the teachers who propagate it. It's instead the people themselves. Each person has their own ideologies, they have their anecdotal experience. Based on this, it's constantly evolving. Their ideologies are constantly evolving and they are the most complete and thorough educators. No private education can hold out against the irresistible force of public opinion. So public opinion is usually swaying. They themselves are forming the ideologies based on rhetorical philosophy or anecdotal experiences and the ordinary moral standards of society. But that makes it all the more essential that public opinion and social environment should not be let to grow up at haphazard as they ordinarily do, but should be made by the wise legislator the expression of the good and be informed in all their details by their knowledge, by his knowledge. The legislator is the only possible teacher of virtue. To put it in simpler terms, Plato believes that public is a real sophist. Their ideology or their opinion is constantly evolving based on their experiences. So we should not let it grow haphazardly. We need to control their opinions. How does he propose to control it? He says it is done by a wise legislator, the expression of the good and be informed in all their details by his knowledge. So he will guide the entire population towards that good life. He will control their opinion. That is what he is saying. This is sort of like an autocracy, you can say. There is too much power in one person's hand, that is the legislator. He is saying it's a wise legislator, and he will dictate how the society will go forward, what knowledge they have and what they do not. So the summary of the paragraph will be that Plato believes that morality is corrupted not by sophists but by public opinion growing haphazardly. He says it should be controlled. How do you control it? By a wise legislator. Hence wise legislator makes decision for everyone. Let's look at the next paragraph. Such a program for a treatise on government might lead us to expect in the politics mainly a description of utopia or ideal state, which might inspire poets or philosophers but have little direct effect upon political institutions. So such a program refers to a program where there is supreme power to one individual or legislator. He will take care of all the public opinion. He will say what is right and what is wrong. He says this will work in utopia, and it is also inspiring poets and philosophers but have little direct effect on political institutions. That is, in real life it will have no effect on political institution. It is bound to fail there. Plato's Republic is obviously impracticable. For the author had turned away in despair from existing politics. He has no proposals in the dialogue, at least, for making the best of things as they are. The first lesson his philosopher has to learn is to turn away from this world of becoming and decay and to look upon the unchanging eternal world of ideas. He says that it is not just impractical, it is also impractical for the reasons that Plato's Republic is asking you to look away from the existing system. Whatever the problems of existing system, he is not trying to make the best of things of what is existing. He is asking you to look away from the world that is becoming and decay and embrace a new world of ideas, an ideal world. Just look away from the existing problem, don't try to solve it, rather embrace a new world. That is what Plato's Republic is proposing. So that is why he says, the author says that this is impractical. Thus his ideal city is, as he says, a pattern laid up in heaven by which the just man may rule his life, a pattern therefore in the meantime for the individual and not for the statesman. So in the ideal world, in heaven, everything is going to work perfectly, where a man will lead his life perfectly, precisely, but in real life it's not going to work out. It is a city, he admits, in the laws for gods or the children of gods, not for men as they are. So even Plato admits it. That this is not a practical system, but instead it is a city it is an ideal case scenario for gods or children of gods and not for men as they are. So let's try to summarize this last paragraph. He says an ideal state legislated by, say, an ideal state by, let's call wise legislator as WL. An ideal state of wise legislator is impractical as it looks away from solving current scenarios. As it looks away. The summary of the last paragraph is, Plato is proposing an ideal system having a wise legislator, but he says that even he believes that it is impractical for the reasons that it looks away from the current issues. He doesn't try to solve it, rather he asks you to embrace a new system where everyone is ideal. At the end he says even he feels that it is impractical. That is the passage. Try to go through, reread and try to get a hold of it. Let's look at the questions now. Which of the following statements would the author most agree with? Aristotle puts legislator on a pedestal that is higher than what he is generally put on today. So he gives a lot of importance to legislator, but there is no mention of how important is a legislator in today's context. There is no mention of that. There is no comparison made. They only speak about how important legislator is there at that time, the Greek era. So again, it is there is no such information. It is out. Aristotle has a low opinion of the ordinary moral standards of society. So here if you observe, it is rather Plato. Plato repudiates the notion that sophists have a corrupting influence. He says that no private education can hold out against the irresistible force of public opinion and the ordinary moral standards of society. So Plato feels that the moral standards of society is ordinary and that instead drives the private education. So this is a Plato's opinion and not Aristotle. So this is wrong. It is not practically possible to achieve a utopia in politics. This is clearly on point. Here we already saw that Plato suggests a republic which is ideal, which makes everyone happy, but this is not practicable. This is correct, on point. Ethics and politics should be inseparable, as it was for Aristotle. So here we can observe that for Aristotle did not separate, as we are inclined to do, the spheres of statesman and the moralist. So Aristotle, they are saying that Aristotle did not separate ethics and morality. There are a lot of overlappingness, but the author never emphasizes that this is how we have to do. He in fact says that we don't tend to do this. He never says we should also adapt this. So again, this is also out. The correct answer is option C. Let's look at second question. What is the author referring to when he says such a program in the first sentence of the last paragraph? Such a program, here such a program refers to public opinion being curtailed. Here they say that the Plato feels that if public opinion is left unchecked, it grows haphazardly, then it will lead to corrupted moral standards. To prevent this, there should be one legislator, one wise legislator who will legislate for everyone. That is what such a program refers to. The fact that no private education can hold out against the irresistible force of public opinion and the ordinary moral standards of society. This is not the system, this is not the program that is being referred to. The program of making public opinion and social environment grow not haphazardly, right, but according to the knowledge given by the legislators. This is on point. This is correct. The program that the government of country should initiate so that people can shape their public opinion in an informed way. So this is partially correct. They say that public opinion should not be left unchecked, it should not grow haphazardly, and also it should be governed by the legislators. This is partially correct. B is a better option. The initiative that the people of any nation should take so that their children can shape their public opinion in an informed way and not haphazardly. It is in fact talks about the general public. They never say kids. There is no words kids that comes up. This is also wrong. Option B is the correct answer. What is the view of moral education implied in the answer? As mentioned in the second paragraph of the passage, Plato and Aristotle both accept the view of moral education implied in this answer. So what is that view? First of all, so he says that for every other say art, for swordsmanship or riding or any other art, you can find teachers easily, you can find good teachers, but there is no skilled teacher or a special teacher who can teach virtue. Virtue is taught by the whole community. That is what is the view here. It is the view that learning virtue is the more important than learning any other art like swordsmanship or riding, etc. That is not the view here. The view is that there is no skilled teacher for virtue, and in fact the entire community teaches it. It is the view that society as a whole should be responsible for teaching virtue rather than assigning the responsibility to a few special teachers. This is on point, looks correct. It is the view that teaching virtue is nobler than teaching arts like sportsmanship, riding, etc. This is again oversimplifying or extrapolating the point. Not right. The answer cannot be determined from the information given in the passage. B looks correct. Let's take B as the correct answer. What is the tone of the passage? Informative, analytical, argumentative, descriptive. Argumentative is a neutral tone where the author, he certainly has an opinion, but he will try to persuade you using facts or say objective narration. Here he doesn't have an opinion. He is not leaning towards anything. There is nothing to lean towards. So argumentative is out. It can seem like informative or describing. He is describing the various philosophies, but if you observe closely, he is analyzing them. Analyzing it is reasoning them, he is understanding them. So it is not just in here. If you observe, I can give you one example here. Plato's Republic is obviously impracticable. This is not an opinion, but it's like he has reasoned it out, and he's also telling why it is not practicable. So clearly you can say this is an analytical tone. He is analyzing all the various philosophies. Let's look at the last question. How many of the following statements can be inferred from the passage? According to Plato, sophists propagate corrupt morality and misinformation. According to Plato. Here he says that Plato repudiates the notion that sophists have a corrupting moral influence upon young men. He says he refuses to accept. So we cannot infer this. So option 1 is we cannot infer. In an ideal world, Plato is likely to agree with an establishment that follows theocracy. So if you know what theocracy is a form of government where it is driven by God, the principles of God, govern That is how the for example, Pakistan is a theocratic state, Islamic theocratic state. That is what theocracy is. There is no mention of theocracy or government being led by godlike principles. There is no such mention. You can say, in fact, you can say this is a, say, ideal autocracy. You can say this. Here Plato says that it should be done by one legislator, one vice legislator, he will make decisions for all. So you can infer ideal autocracy but not theocracy. As per Plato, in an ideal city, the contemporary difficulties are solved in order to empower each individual towards utopia. This again, clearly this is false. See, here we summarized it as an ideal state of led by a wise legislator is impractical as it looks away from solving current issues and it asks you to embrace new system. That is the system, the Plato's Republic. It proposes you to forget about all the becoming and decay that is happening in the system. It doesn't put any effort to make the best of the existing things. It just says that embrace the new system, new ideas. This is clearly wrong. It is not empowering each individual. It is not looking towards the current existing system. So even we cannot infer this either. Aristotle's work on ethics is useful in enforcing morality amongst individuals. So this also we summarized in the first paragraph. Here he says that his work is not to empower or reinforce the beliefs of one individual. It is rather to present legislative opportunities. That also we saw here. Teaching morality to individuals, that is not the purpose. It is rather the purpose for legislative opportunities. So even we cannot infer this. So the correct answer is 0. There is nothing present. 1, 2, 3 is there. The correct answer is option D.